What's going on, guys, and welcome back to another video, and welcome to your stimulus package update and daily news report for Tuesday, March 29th. So we actually have some pretty big news because we're now starting to see that the Senate and the House, they're starting to work together. They're starting to try and get bills passed, or at least move the negotiations further along. And this is really good news. We also are going to talk about the Russia and Ukraine news that's coming out, because there's a lot of reports that are saying that Russia and Ukraine are coming closer to an agreement, which is good, but there's also some bad news that one of Vladimir Putin's allies is saying that no, Russia does not want to negotiate. They want to continue to fight, and they want to take over all of Ukraine. So I will address that at the end of this video. But here's what we need to discuss right now. What we know is that U.S. consumer prices are rising at the fastest rate in 40 years. These rising prices are actually outpacing wages and are only getting worse due to the Russian war in Ukraine. Now, the reason why I want to bring this up is very simple, because experts worry that with gas prices near record highs, the lower income families here in the United States are going to feel the brunt of this impact. That is going to make a huge statement. And here's the reason why I say this. Over the past couple of years, we have seen business owners get PPP funding. We've seen business owners get stimulus checks. Business owners and the wealthier or middle class and even upper class households in the United States have received different stimulus, child tax credit payments, and so on. Well, the lower income families, the lower income households only received a fraction of what the wealthier individuals here in the United States have received. And that's a huge issue. But in a recent survey, 9% of Americans stated that the war in Ukraine was the top problem that we are currently facing. 22% said the government is the top problem outside of our economy. 17% said the top problem is inflation, and 4% said it was fuel prices. Now, let's consider those. 9% said it's the war in Ukraine. Well, the war in Ukraine is going to impact inflation. It's going to impact fuel prices. Okay? So, really, we are seeing a huge worry with inflation and fuel prices. That is a problem. In a recent poll, we also saw that 75% of Americans believe that conditions are only getting worse. And here's the tough part about that number. That is just how negative the American people felt back in April of 2020. Okay, April of 2020. I don't think I need to remind you what happened in April of 2020. It wasn't a great time. This was a tough time. We were going through lockdowns. We couldn't go anywhere without a mask. Nobody had a vaccine. We were still discussing that because that was when the beginning of COVID happened. And so 2020 was a very tough time. But the American people are just now, we have the same optimism or we're just as pessimistic as we were back then. That's a struggle. And right now, many people are just asking for more help. Americans want clarity. We want to know that we are the priority. It's us. It's us here in the United States, here within the borders, not people in another country. Again, it's tough times because we do need to step up and we do need to help people in Ukraine. But at the same time, everybody here is asking, what about us? How are we going to fix this issue? We have border issues here. We have rising gas prices here. We have shortages of food. We have shortages of building materials. We have a housing shortage, right? How do we fix those issues? And that's a real concern. Now, this is where progressives have actually pushed to try to get more for the American people. Progressives say that right now they need to push to get something done. And progressives have been fighting harder than really ever before due to the fact that they believe if President Biden doesn't get more done, he has to get more passed, then they will be badly beaten in the midterm elections. But the truth, really, is that some progressive priorities did have support amongst Democrats. Some didn't. But here's some of the ones that did. Okay? We know universal pre-K is still up for debate. This is still something that many say this needs to be included because not only would this help younger age children, it would also help we'd be a little more competitive when it comes to education, but it would help parents because parents would not have to pay for childcare. They could take their children to pre-K. They could be watched there. They could be educated while the parent is off working. That would really help out our economy. We also know negotiating prescription drug prices is still very likely to pass. This isn't something that's just being discussed or potentially negotiated. This is something that they are saying should be passed and is likely to pass. So that's good news there. We know paid family medical leave is still being considered, but this was still being considered up until about a few weeks ago. As of right now, I'm not 100% sure on this, but the expectation is, yes, people are still considering this. And then we got the child tax credit payments. This is still on the table. There's bipartisan support here. However, there's only bipartisan support as long as Democrats are open to the idea of including a work requirement. If not, then this bill is pretty much dead in the water. Now, getting all these things passed might not be doable at this time, but this doesn't mean progressives are not going to push for everything that they can, everything that they've asked for, and everything that they've promised the American people. That's something that they're willing to do. And they're willing to do that for a couple reasons. One, because the American people need additional help. And two, because progressives need help to retain their seats. So, we'll see what happens there. Now, the Senate just yesterday, they did something. They actually passed something. They approved a bill for $52 billion. But that's $52 billion in U.S. subsidies for semiconductor chips manufacturing. Now, this is far from what the Senate first passed back in probably like June or July of this year. They actually passed a bill for $190 billion, okay, to try to compete with China. Great. Well, now the House will need to take up this bill and really this vote again through a process known as a conference. But the good news is that the U.S. is trying to take back pretty much its manufacturing of chips. Because about 20 years ago, the reports indicate that the U.S. produced nearly 40% of all chips. But today, we're producing about 12%. So a huge decrease in that 40-year time span, or that 20-year time span. Now, Senator Bernie Sanders, he doesn't like the idea of $52 billion in U.S. subsidies, and he's actually calling this corporate greed. But this is a move somewhat in the right direction. We're getting some momentum. And that's what I know I say this often, but with the Senate and the House, the main thing is just have to get momentum. That's all we need, just some momentum. Get the plans moving. But right now, what we're going to do is we have to wait on the House. The House does plan to take up a vote on this as early as sometime later this week. So that's good news there. We should have some news on that. But the expectation is, it's going to come back to the Senate. It's going to come back to the Senate. The Senate will have to vote on this again. But the good news is something should happen. And in a time when President Biden is proposing a $5.8 trillion budget, which would actually bring in tax revenue of roughly $2.5 trillion, these are big moves by the current administration and Democrats. Democrats are trying to make some moves, make some changes. Some say it's actually a little bit too late, but others say it's better late than never. But let me know your thoughts. Are you glad Democrats are trying to do something now? Or are you thinking, yeah, it's late. You should have been doing this about a year ago when you first got into office. Now, whether these things ultimately happen or not, honestly, I don't know. That would be for a different story, but I will keep you updated on what we see as we move forward. Now, here's something else I want to touch on. I want to touch on Social Security and the potential of a 7.6% cost of living adjustment. Now, what most people think is that when Social Security gets a raise, then it's going to put more money back into seniors' pockets. And everybody says that's a good thing. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Social Security has been set up to keep Social Security recipients poor and keep them under the federal poverty line. Now, there is no situation where Social Security recipients are making bank due to these increases. That's not happening. Okay? And the reason for this is actually pretty simple. It's because when the cost of living adjustment is projected to be 7.6%. Okay, or let's just take the 5.9% for 2022. When we saw 5.9% for 2022, many people were like, oh, this is great. But the problem was we were seeing inflation at that time at like 6.2, 6.3%. So this meant that inflation was running hotter than what the projected cost of living adjustment was. So this meant no matter what, Social Security recipients were going to receive less money than what inflation was going to cause. Do you see why that's an issue? Now, there is a Social Security 2100 Act, a sacred trust, that is calling for Social Security benefits to be in line with inflation, plus get a little bit of a tick up there. Now, that would be a huge boost to Social Security recipients. The problem is that would also tax people that are making less than $400,000 per year, which President Biden has already said he will not allow taxes to be increased to anybody making less than $400,000 per year. So that's why we are seeing this issue. Now, what I can tell you is that Social Security benefits or beneficiaries are going to see their buying power reduced, and it's going to be reduced substantially. Because if we see that, yes, we are going to get a 7.6% cost of living adjustment for 2023, just know that's not all good news, because that means inflation is probably higher than 7.6%. We're currently at 7.9%, and in the next about a week, we're going to see the new data, the new CPI report, which is likely to be up over 8%. So, as we get those reports, I promise I will fill you on those updates as soon as we get them. Now, let's address the $1.5 billion that you could potentially get. Because right now, according to the IRS is stating that 1.5 million Americans have yet to claim their 2018 federal tax returns. And the median refund for this date, for 2018, was about $813, $815 per person. So, I bring this up for one main reason. There's a 3-year statute of limitations, and if you don't file your 2018 federal tax refund before April 18th of 2022, then you're effectively just giving this money over to the U.S. Treasury, and you won't be able to get any of this money back. So, if you've yet to file your 2018 tax return, which you would have filed in 2019, that's why there's a 3-year statute of limitations. Okay? Just understand, you have until April 18th, or I believe it's April 19th in Maine or another state or whatever, but it's April 18th for the majority of states. So if you are not sure if you filed, double check, make sure you do, because you could at least get, or potentially get, about $800 right back to your pocket. So some good news there. Now let's get to the Ukraine and Russia news for a second, because Ukraine says that Russia is going to reduce their military operations near Kyiv. Ukraine also has stated that Russian forces have been driven back as the ceasefire talks are beginning. And Ukraine also says that negotiations have to ramp up due to the fact that the West sanctions against Russia are doing very little. So this is Ukraine's best option as of right now. Now, that's probably not the greatest news for the United States, because we were the ones that were supposed to be seen as coming in, helping out, and providing some support. Well, we did provide a little bit of support. However, and this is something that I addressed about 3 weeks ago, is Russia already planned for a lot of this stuff. Russia already set up different systems that if, yes, the West provided sanctions, imposed sanctions, it wasn't going to impact Russia as heavily as many people expected. That's exactly what's happening. Now, one of Vladimir Putin's allies has also stated that the Russia and Ukraine negotiations are almost pointless because Russia just wants to keep fighting and ultimately take over Ukraine. So we will see how these negotiations play out that are happening today, but hopefully something good comes from them. So, that's what we know at this time. A lot of big news. A lot of stuff is happening right now. Again, and I said this before, I think over the next couple of weeks, we are going to see a lot more reports, a lot more updates on potentially good things that are happening. So, as we do, I promise, I'll fill you in on all the latest news and updates. Again, thank you guys for watching. Consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys on the next one.